Um, our next item, item 10, is about update on Green Lanes Area Transport Study, and Anne Cunningham is going to present her report in this area.
Hi. Okay. In March 2015, at the behest of concerns of a number of residents within the Haringey and St Anne's wards, the former Cabinet Member, Councillor McNamara, arranged for a public meeting to take place with residents of the area to express their concerns about traffic issues within those roads, primarily at that time focused around the Haringey, Whiteman Road areas. From that meeting, it was identified that there were wide-ranging concerns from residents about transport issues in that ward and in the St Anne's ward and overlapping into the Seven Sisters ward. And we were tasked with procuring a consultant to undertake a study to look at the to look at those concerns and what we might be able to do to produce a strategy to address those underlying concerns. We at that point produced a project brief, which we circulated to key stakeholders, including resident groups who were interested and ward members from the affected 3 wards, to ask their input on what and how we should procure this consultant, which we subsequently compiled and basically produced a study area, which on page 48 is coloured in. The total extent of the blue, green and orange areas are the extent that was determined to be the study area, and the full brief that was put together with the agreement of those stakeholders is included in Appendix A. We tendered that, and the aim of the study was to look at how we could improve public realm, rationalise traffic volumes and routes in the area, improve road safety, maintain enhanced bus services, enhance pedestrian and cycle accessibility, and improve the quality of life for the residents within the area. A consultant was brought on board. That organisation is Stig Lavis Gleave, and they were appointed in February 2016. Since that point, we took an inception meeting which took place in March 2016, where we introduced the key stakeholders and residents groups and members to the consultant, and it was agreed at that point it would be effective to establish a steering group involving those key representatives from those key stakeholder groups and members to act as to use the term, critical friend, to help guide and steer and inform the development of the consultation process. So that stakeholder group was established and has since then met 5 times at various stages through the project to discuss progress and help guide and inform the decisions that were made. The Cabinet Member for Environment chairs that steering group. Following the inception meeting, the first step was to undertake a formal area-wide consultation and engagement with all of the residents in the area about what their concerns were, and therefore obviously to help to inform what the consultant would subsequently look at. So a large online consultation exercise took place during the summer, I believe, which identified thousands of different issues that the residents would had, and I was included in Appendix D, and I apologise what's in the report has not come through very well, but what we've included in Appendix D basically is a summary of all the issues, and I've got fuller copies that I could provide to people if they want, or in digital form. Fuller copies of all the issues that were raised. What we did past that point, or up to that point, we also were developing as the steering group and with the consultant an assessment framework in order that we could look at all those issues that have come in and prioritise them against the assessment framework to decide which were the important ones or more important ones, that met the criteria of what the study was about and would therefore be looked further at, and which of them would be excluded. So through a period of a number of months running up until Christmas, we've started with this long list of thousands of different issues and have compiled that down into a series of packages of work, the short list, which then the consultant has gone away, developed, undertaken further investigation and development of options and ideas how to address those concerns. Those options are being packaged together. Again, we didn't include those packages of work, although they are identified here. The packages of work basically relate to a series of options for Whiteman Road, a series of options for green lanes, a series of options for the ladder roads, options for the St Anne's Road, and then area-wide options for improving walking and cycling. There are, again, it was too large to include there, but the link under 6.1.2, there is a link to the Haringey website that includes all the documents, all the proposals that are being developed, the assessment framework, the outcomes of all the meetings. The aim was once the consultant has finished this more detailed assessment of the shortlist, that they will undertake another large area-wide public consultation basically on this information to determine what the residents feel about these packages of work, whether they think they're good ideas or not. From that, they will then tailor down a final report which will basically provide recommendations and priorities about what's in that should be adopted by the council as its strategy for short, medium and long-term measures that could be delivered within the study area to help improve the transport situation going around. In regards to delivering it, funding is available. I mean, we immediately, or within the next financial year, there's a package of £350,000 worth of funding proposed as part of the Sustainable Transport Work Plan to deliver series of measures coming out of that. It is intended that in the subsequent 2 years there will be an equivalent amount of money, so totaling over 3 years, just over £1 million worth of measures to deliver outcomes to the study. We would also, through processes like the planning process, development contributions and other bidding opportunities, be looking for funding to deliver some of these other larger scale proposals that will be coming out, and some will be tied in. Some of the options are related developments that may or will be coming forward in the future, and therefore this document will help inform those decisions at the planning stage about what transport measures may be required to deliver that. Just touching briefly on another bit that was asked to be covered in this, which is the Whiteman Road closure. As I'm sure everyone here is aware, that due to the deteriorating structure of the Whiteman Road Bridge, it needed to be replaced. Those works were undertaken by Network Rail on behalf of the council, funded by Transport for London. The road was closed from March 2016 through to September 2016 to facilitate those closures. At that time, a series of closures along the road were introduced. There was a mix of popularity and dislike from the residents of those measures, and there has been an active campaign from some of the residents of the area to have those measures made permanent. We have agreed to and are looking at, as part of the Green Lane study, to look at the implications of such a measure, so that when it's put out to the wider community for comment, that they can express their views about that, the benefits or the disbenefits of those wider measures. I think it's probably easy if I pick up individual bits on questions rather than go through in more detail.
Thank you for updating us, Peter. I will now take questions. I'll start with Steve.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Actually, on that last point you made, I've got to say that my own observations of the closure was it did create quite a lot of vehicle chaos in other parts. You know, like we were talking earlier on about air quality, and I think, you know, there's stationary traffic right the way from, Wood Green to the bottom of Muswell Hill during the rush hour, and just cars pumping out and lorries pumping out fuel because, you know, they was taking that way. Paddy was often blocked, and Hornsey Park Road started off quite well. That ended up, people found that and they were using that. So I think my own personal view, if you decided to close Whiteman Road permanently, it would be retrograde. But the question I wanted to ask is, where you said that page 50 on 526, that Haringey took the opportunity to carry out the following improvement works on Whiteman Road, and one of them was the installation of a second CCTV camera near the junction with Lowfair Road South to improve monitoring and enforcement activities to discourage inappropriate use by heavy goods vehicles. Can I just ask you to clarify, if you can, does that mean vehicles being too heavy to go over the bridge, or does that mean that heavy goods vehicles shouldn't be using roads like Whiteman Road? And another reason I ask that is, if you go right down Whiteman Road and cross over at Turnpike Lane, the junction Turnpike Lane into Hornsey Park Road, the residents there, I mean, almost daily are telling me that they are fed up with large heavy goods vehicles crashing down their road, and they say that the houses vibrate. So is it to reduce the use by HGVs, or reduce the use of really heavy HGVs? Is there a limit of, on weight that they shouldn't be using those roads, or is it purely the bridge?
I'll be able to answer. Yeah. I think most of those roads have a 7.5 tonne weight restriction that applies, and that's what we're actually enforcing. So we probably did put an additional weight restriction in prior to the bridge being refilled, I think is the best description. So we have got some. I think a few years ago, new legislation was introduced that allowed us to enforce those weight restrictions by CCTV camera. So we have got some enforcement. I have to kind of caveat that with the fact that I think I really struggle with this at one level, because people are under the impression that if there's a weight restriction in the road, then that no vehicles of that weight can go down, but they can for access purposes. So when we tell our residents that we are enforcing, and it was a particular issue on Whiteman Road, a lot of those vehicles were going through for legitimate reasons. So we were enforcing, but of course tickets had to be subsequently cancelled. So I think when we do put those cameras in, it gives residents some reassurance, but I think it also causes some disappointment that it doesn't stop those vehicles full stop going down the roads, which we can't do, because if you want to have a delivery, the refuse will go down. And then of course on Whiteman Road there's a Fitzpatrick's yard, so there's a
number of yards.
There are at that end, so they've exactly, and so they have legitimate right to go down there anyway. So I think it's when it comes to the enforcement of those, and so it is the weight restrictions, and we have got many of them across the borough, but the enforcement of those does present challenges, and I think does at times present disappointments to residents, where we're saying, well, we are actually enforcing, and they come back and say, well, yes, but they're still going through my road, and that's because they're actually perfectly entitled to do so. So I just mention that as a caveat.
Do you want to come?
If I could just briefly, on the first point you made, is that yes, certainly in regards to when the Whiteman Road closure was in place, that I think there was widespread recognition that there was implication, as you say, all the way across, through Crouch End into Highgate, and obviously the residents' perception in the area was that obviously it was wonderful because it did, and of course it did completely change their environment, but obviously we have to also consider the impact on residents borough-wide. And the impact, but obviously the benefit, including that in the study, is that we can effectively model and demonstrate to them the implications of that, so there's full understanding of the consequences of that happening. And if we should choose not to move forward with a closure of Whiteman Road, they can understand the reason for that decision being made.
Yeah. I noticed quite a few of you put their hands up. So I will start with Clive, then everybody will have their turn.
Thank you, Chair. I know Whiteman Road well, and I should declare a bit of an interest here because I live close to it and I cross it many times a week. and when it was closed, it was just wonderful. To not have to suffer the noise and the pollution and the waits in order to cross the road. My general impression is that this road it's not a wide road, and yet it carries a huge amount of traffic. I think I saw the figure somewhere. I think it's a significant proportion, is it not, of the traffic that's carried on green lanes that runs parallel. I think, is it 3/4 of the traffic? It's some fantastic percentage, which surprised me. My question is, making it one way. I imagine that the traffic north and south must be in balance. Could you say a bit about that? So, I mean, if you were going to make it one way, would you favour one direction over another, please?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, the Whiteman Road, you're right, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but it does include a very significant percentage of the traffic that is on green lanes, but equally there are a number of other roads in the study area, primarily within the St Anne's ward, that carry equivalent. So yes, I mean, although it is an undesirably large amount of traffic for what is fundamentally a residential road, unfortunately it's a problem that is suffered on a number of different roads. So yes, but it does cause us a problem where we would like to address that, and but we have to look at the consequences, because we know if we stop the traffic using that route, then it is going to go somewhere else, and therefore, as with the closure or one way, it's going to have consequences. And while we might improve the environment for that specific road, the risk is that we might make or worsen the situation for other residents. So it becomes a very challenging situation to look at that, and that is, I suppose, the point of including the closure and the one-way options in both directions in the study, so there can be full understanding of everyone of what the potential consequences are, and therefore what would need to be undertaken to mitigate that impact. And therefore, for a fair assessment to say is that if we need to do all these work to impact this measure, or it's going to have these negative impacts on other residents, is it something that's viable to take forward? In regards to the option of which of the two ways, there is, I mean, they have different benefits. You're right, obviously morning and evening peak, there is a certain amount of tidal flow going on there, and therefore one option of the one way would be better in the morning peak, one in the evening. There is preferences, I think, that will be drawn out and flagged as part of the consultation, to which would be a better direction for the one way, and that, I think, ties in with the operation of the tidal flow on green lanes. So, we will present the option that would have the least impact on green lanes, and I think that partially relates to one of the big hold-ups on green lanes is to do with the right turn manoeuvres in and out of the ladder roads. So obviously there's natural, if one of the directions of the one way on Whiteman Road would encourage those right turns to take place, because of the movements the other direction would discourage them, because they would only be going back on themselves if they turned in. So there are certainly transport benefits to one direction or other. The reason we've included both options, because there was a split of view in the residents, is because it was relatively little additional work to model both options, and therefore it was decided that we would present the outcomes and implications of both options so people could fully understand them. But in transport terms, there is a benefit, because I think if you're wanting to use Whiteman Road as a rat run, if the only manoeuvre you can make is to go back on, also if you're coming up green lanes, you're not going to cut up the ladder roads if you can only go back on yourself, and therefore in transport terms, one direction is better than the other. I'm not sure. It's all going to be set out very clearly in the information that's presented. I could probably try and sketch up diagrams and confuse myself a bit with doing that, but the analysis that were presented will clearly show the benefits, disbenefits of each of those options and why, and the impact of those proposals in transport terms, borough-wide, associated through the modelling. Oh, sorry.
Just a couple of small follow-ups. One, when Whiteman Road was closed last year, was there any modelling or measurements done to see what the effect of that closure was. I'm interested to know, was there any net reduction in traffic recorded? I'm just wondering whether it was all displaced onto green lanes or whether there was any kind of reduction at all. That's the first question. And the last question is, I did hear a suggestion from somebody that there weren't enough options presented here. Have you got any comments on that, please? Because there are broadly three options, which was tinkering, one way, or I quite like this phrase, filtering, which means closure.
Certainly, okay, with regards to where measures done, yes, when Whiteman Road was closed, we did a series while Whiteman Road was closed, heavily in the area, but also on all the main roads around the borough as well. And that was undertaken while the closure was in place and while it wasn't. So the modelling we've done is based on of the implications of the closure is based on actual traffic flows that occurred while the Whiteman Road closure was in place. So yes, we fully understand the implications of that, and that's what's been built into the model. Was there a reduction in traffic? I can't remember the exact percentage. I believe it was, yes, about a 7% reduction. So where the vast majority of it was displaced elsewhere in the borough, there was an overall reduction, and I think the figure was 7% off the top of my head. The number of options we're looking at, and obviously, in regards to options, yes, there are a lot of options. I mean, to be honest, I think that in regards to all the suggestions and all the consultants' ideas, I think the tinkering, which is quite extensive tinkering because it relates to dealing with a lot of the parking issues on the footway, the tinkering, the one-way, two one-way options, and the full closure or filtering, depending on that, which we call it, were the predominant options that came out of the consultation. So, but at the end of the day, even if there were other sub-options and bits and pieces, we have to accept that there's only a limited amount of work that the consultants do. If you actually break down, because when we say options, we're calling them packages, but actually each of the options, and there are 7 that are being looked at, actually include 10 or 20 different pieces of work that create a package. And therefore we're actually looking at the implications of dozens of different pieces of work. They're just being summarised up into options for simplicity rather than trying to deal with them all individually. But that constitutes a very large piece of work and a lot of modelling. And we had to be practical that where we started with thousands of different ideas and individual pieces, we couldn't look at the implications of all of that. The time and the cost associated with doing that were just beyond what we could afford. And therefore that was where the assessment framework came from, which was developed with the steering group to try and manoeuvre those thousands of different issues down into what ended probably up into 100 or 2, which formed those 7 packages, which is what is being looked at in more detail. So, but even though it is being reduced, it is still quite an extensive piece of work, and probably the largest. Well, it is by far the largest piece of traffic assessment and modelling that the borough has ever done into one specific issue, and therefore, it's hard to say that we haven't done enough because we've never done more before, and I'm sure many areas of the borough would have liked us to do such an extensive piece of work on their wards as well.
Bob, yeah.
Okay, just comment. I mean, there's between Whiteman Road closure. Obviously, some people liked it, and cyclists from quite far across the borough may have actually changed their route over the time it was closed to put it into their route in order to get down the borough because it produced a really safe route down to Finsbury Park. And I used it a lot, and I wouldn't be in the study area to be asked whether it was good. So how will you pick up people who found it was beneficial who aren't in that study area?
No. As I said, the original consultation, obviously, for the stage 1 engagement when we were determining issues wasn't restricted, although we obviously needed to determine where people were responding from. And so that was opened up to wider areas, and certainly the HEC, who were on the steering group with us, were engaged, and they certainly engaged more widely with other groups to express their views and concerns to include in that. And when we come to the stage 2 consultation on the options, again, that will not be restricted to just the study area. It will be an open document that's available. We encourage our stakeholder members to raise awareness of that. Again, we will be asking and identifying where people are responding from, because it's important for us to know whether they're locals or they live in another borough. But we won't be limiting it to residents, so we will try and engage. And, and groups like the HCC will be actively encouraged to get as many people to comment as possible. Interestingly, it is recognised that Whiteman Road is an important route. One of the other projects that's going on that will start to move forward, it had hoped to progress in the current financial year, but didn't move very far because TfL didn't approve the funding, is one of the quiet road routes. It's from Farringdon to Bowes Park. That the original preferred route for that, because was via Whiteman Road. Obviously, it was considered inappropriate because of the level of the traffic, and is being routed the other side of the railway line, which is more hilly and less appropriate. But and that's a project. There's going to be about £1 million of investment, hopefully, in the coming financial year, now that TfL have approved it, to promote that quiet way route. What we have said, and what has been said, is that obviously, if out of this consultation that measures are introduced in Whiteman Road that makes it more appropriate for cycling, because it is more a desirable route, that quiet way route would be diverted or encouraged to change to use the Whiteman Road route rather than its current proposed alignment.
Yeah, do you want to
I would comment that well-known route, which is over the ridge, I doubt the cycling officer in Haringey could get up it on his Brompton, which he usually rides around. It's really, really hard, and average cyclists can't get up it. It's up, what is it, up Denton Road, is it, or up? It goes over the ridge, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. That wasn't one of my points, but I think it's a really hard route to say, almost pointless to say that's the preferred route for an important route, because a lot of people would have to push. You've got a balance between the costs of delivering some of the solutions and the fact that some of the solutions were medium popular. Maybe 6-7 people liked them if you look at the analysis, but they were very interesting, and they might be very low cost, and you could do quite a few of them. And then you've got the very popular ones, which maybe had 30 votes or something like that, which could be very expensive. So I was picking out, for example, the path alongside the New River as a potentially quite nice thing to have, although there'll no doubt be very diverse views in terms of it affects the security of my house to open it up. But there was also the idea that there would be a pedestrian route over the railway from the Harringay Passage. Again, a very desirable thing, but I should think that that's probably one of the ones which is very expensive. But if you actually want to promote a walking borough and to get people off the main roads, the Haringey Passage is a really great route. The only problem is it just ends at whatever road it ends at. I forget the name of it now, but you'll know. No, it starts at Turnpike Lane, but it goes right the way down to a road which just runs parallel to the railway. And there's no way through, and it would be great to have a route there. So how are you going to balance cost, desirability, how many projects you can do?
Okay, the tissue, the quiet route, I do agree with you, and that obviously of the issue of the difficulty of the proposed alignment for the quiet way. Yes, I mean that is something that's been subject to a lot of consultation with the HCC, Sustrans, who are the consultant that TfL originally brought in, and ourselves. However, it's been agreed that it's the only potential route, but as Whiteman Road as it stands is just not appropriate. I mean, it's obviously hoped as part of what we're doing here, we will be able to convert Whiteman Road into a route that is more appropriate to deliver that, and therefore we can then realign the quiet way route. Yes, you picked up a good point about priorities. And it is going to be getting through the study and identifying, obviously, and what are potentially short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures is going to be a challenge. We will obviously have a stab at that as part of the information we're putting out, because we're equally going to have a stab at the idea of cost. There is no point in saying putting forward the measure for say closing Whiteman Road that would require a whole series of amendments of traffic signals around the borough to make it work that may cost many millions of pounds when we don't have that money to put it. So that would have to remain a long-term aspiration that we would seek funding for. We know we've got a fair amount of money. Once we've got the report, which will try and identify the community's views on what's priorities, what our views on priorities and roughly what we feel those projects cost, we will try and identify which ones we can afford to do, trying to maximise the initial benefit and develop a programme over those first 3 years of how we were going to spend that £1 million. I accept that's going to be a challenge, because obviously there's going to be a lot of parties that would like to see the money invested in their specific project, and we have to accept that Whiteman Road is a specific issue that we do need to do something about. But equally, there are a number of other areas in St Anne's specifically where we need to be seen to be undertaking measures, because equally they have problems that we want to help address. So it's a challenge, and I don't necessarily have the outcome. We're hoping that the consultation and the feedback and what we present to it will help inform that process, but it will be a matter of officers sitting down with the Cabinet member with the final report that we should hopefully have in June or July, and then prioritising how we start spending the money within next financial year onwards.
Sorry, I'm waving.
I think had summed the situation up quite well, and I think while, the steering group, I think they're quite aspirational in what they want, they're also quite sensible and pragmatic in terms of what can, I think, be delivered. I think there was a view of that. So, I don't know, I think you covered it quite well.
I thought the approach shown, for example, just on page 85, it's just one of them, you've got lots of these sorts of plots. I think they're very helpful in terms of showing what was popular. Or at least it helped me. There's a whole lot of really nice ideas, but they've only got one person saying that they'd like them.
But I suppose I should have mentioned before, I mean, obviously, although a lot of what we've done is based on what the issues raised by the community, obviously what has come out of that has been informed by the consultants. We've just not gone along like, oh, this is what the residents have asked for, this is what we'll look at. That all that has done is helped inform the options and ideas developed by the consultants to address what are considered to be the problems. So there's a lot of added value to the issues just raised by the public.
Could I just ask a difficult question, which is, do you think, I was wondering this myself, and I don't know those consultants at all, they've just presented you with a very indigestible mass of information which you've got now to do something with?
I mean, no, I accept. I mean,
would you have liked them to have produced a more digested, honed down thing that the Cabinet member and you can think about?
No, and I think that is where we ended up. I think we have to be practical about. Obviously, there is a lot of information, and I mean, if you go onto the website, sort of all the analysis of the existing situations and traffic models is a vast amount of data, and all the modelling that's going on is a vast amount of data. What is being put together, and I hope when we're working with the steering group on is to try and present that information in digestible and informative chunks, to make it accessible for the public to understand the outcomes of that. And then what we're going to end up with is a large amount of data coming back from the consultation, which again has to be funneled down into a meaningful report that we can easily understand and address. So it is a challenge, and seeing what's coming out, obviously what's being produced for the consultation material for the next round of engagement, I think the consultants are doing a very good job. And I'm hoping that equally they will do a very good job at producing the report, digested and informed report. But yes, I accept it is a very challenging and very large piece and very difficult when you're dealing with such a vast and wide amount of area, which is why the consultation material is challenged. This is why it couldn't be included. It's just you couldn't send that much information out through the post, with sending thousands of versions of hundreds of pages of documents out. So we getting that engagement mechanism and getting the information is going to be a challenge.
I think there are some questions on this side, Barbara. So, please.
I can see it's going to be a problem managing expectations because, and if I've sort of taken part in this consultation and I've said, then it says that 85 people out of 195 want to remove parking on green lanes, I'm going to expect it to be reflected somehow in the options. So how are you going to manage, how are you managing people's expectations? And is this going to be rolled up elsewhere because other people in different parts of the ward are going to be saying, hold on, different parts of the borough are going to be saying, we've spent a lot of resources or we've focused on this area. When's our turn?
Are we going to meet people's expectations? I suppose I'll start with the second bit there first. Is obviously the cabinet member at the time decided to commit what is a large amount of resource to this project. I suppose and it isn't as it stands something that we could afford to roll out on everywhere. I suppose if for reasons it was decided that we wanted to spend, I mean, and am I allowed to say how much we spent on that?
It's in the public.
It's in the public. Well, I mean, we've spent over a couple of £100,000, or will have done, on this study by the time it's completed. That's obviously within the scope of our budgets. That's not something that we can do all of the time. And as you say, we are generating a lot of expectations, and I think that's something we've got to carefully manage, because obviously there's a lot of feeling from the community that now we've identified all these options, and and there will be options including that it will include removing parking or different management of parking on green lanes, that people will expect us to deliver all of those. And as we say, practically we've set aside a sizable chunk of money over the next 3 years to deliver outcomes of this, but we equally have to be conscious that this isn't the whole of the borough, and that other wards in the borough need an appropriate a level of funding spent in them to address other transport issues, and therefore we can't deliver everything out of that. And so yes, it is something that we and the cabinet member are working hard to manage the expectations of the residents of what we can deliver now, and what will set the longer term context, what may happen over the next 10, 15, 20 years or associated with developments and other works that go on when opportunities come up that we will deliver. But I'm sure there will be some hope from many residents that it's all done in the first couple of years, which unfortunately it won't be.
And I think it's a pity Emma's left, because she could actually contribute quite well to this part of our discussion, because obviously with all the regeneration and all the development across the borough, there are going to be opportunities to really improve the transport infrastructure. And I suppose I'm saying there's going to be a need to do it as part of all that development. So especially in the Tottenham area, there's going to have to be quite a focus there. So I think Peter's right. I mean, we have, our funds are what they are. We've got our LIP allocation, and then we've got our council allocation, which is really for maintenance. But I think going forward there will be opportunities for the other areas, especially the Tottenham, well, it's not limited, and even Wood Green, to benefit as a consequence of the development that's planned for, well, some of it is not the too distant future. And I think some of that might actually help us, because we were trying to forward plan with green lanes in terms of what developments we are aware of now. But, it's everything is moving very fast, isn't it? So that might actually help us in terms of delivering some of the green lane stuff. But it'll also help us with opportunities in the rest of the borough in terms of big traffic reviews. And of course, in the meantime, we continue with a lot of our traffic schemes, which and our works planning general, which is spread out across the borough, so that every ward gets its allocation, hopefully a fair share of the allocation.
Well, I'm a St Anne's ward councillor, so I'm involved in I come to the steering group meetings. I live in the Gardens. I was a founder member and the first chair of the Gardens Residents Association, so I'm quite well aware of the issues within the Green Lanes study. I mean, and really the points I'm going to make are not for yourselves, but I do want to make them. We haven't got the cabinet member here or the previous cabinet member, but you know, we are living in a time of very tight budgets, which the budgets are scrutinised quite extensively by the Liberal Democrats and by ourselves. Also, the use of consultants is scrutinised. So, and while I don't expect you to answer, I would like that minuted, because I think we should have scrutiny of the decisions that were made around that study, and particularly where I think there are other wards where councillors may well say, well, actually, we've got traffic issues in our wards, and we'd like some of that. So I think as the scrutiny panel, I think we need to understand the process. If this kind of study is going to be rolled out, what the effect will be on budgets and actually the extended use of consultants. And I think that the consultants that have been doing this study, you know, have done a good job. Don't get me wrong, but I certainly think it's something that we should be scrutinising. And as I attend the steering group meeting, I won't go into the whys and wherefores of, you know, but I would like to just talk about, and perhaps the consultation. I mean, I, like everybody, would like, I mean, if you ask me what would I like, I'd like a wall built around Haringey so that nobody could drive across, you know, I mean, and I mean, I'm looking at the terms of reference for the steering group, which you've got in here, which is just an advisory. I mean, is an advisory. But how? I mean, the consultation. How are you going to narrow that down in terms of, you know? Because I've put in comments that residents, because I meet with residents who don't come to the steering group, so I've put comments in on behalf of them. Now, I don't think that I can say, if a resident says to me, I don't know, you know, if a resident says, well, I'd like our road blocked off and a park built on it, I don't feel that I can say, well, I'm not going to submit that. I'm submitting those comments on behalf of people who are not coming to the steering group and have got the opportunity to raise them. So how is all of that going to be narrowed down so that we actually come up with something that works? Because if we picked up on everything that everyone wants, we'd have no money ever, and we'd probably, you know, I mean, I'm not a traffic expert, so as much as I might want this and that, I might want green lanes closed off and it turned into a swimming pool or something. You know, I mean, clearly, do you see the point I'm making? So, you know, I think the consultation is quite important because we have put a lot of store on that consultation, haven't we? Or we are doing.
Yes, certainly. I mean, and as we'll put a lot of store on the second one. I mean, I think we have to look. Obviously, as you said, we got lots of ideas in. There were thousands of original responses and ideas that came in through the original engagement process. The way that was whittled down to workable, more manageable levels was through the assessment framework. So, I say the steering group came up. The consultant developed and discussed with the steering group and stakeholders the assessment framework, and that was applied to whittle the number of measures down, along with the consultant adding their own merit. They looked at what people said, you know, and developed options based on what people said. They wouldn't, you know, if someone had asked for a specific thing, they interpreted that to a measure that would work. So what we've got within the packages that are going to be consulted on are a series of measures that work and that are viable. Now, when I say viable, that doesn't mean, you know, closing Whiteman Road is viable, but it has consequences. So as part of this next step, now that we've got a more manageable level of viable proposals, we need to present that to the wider public and say, here we go, these are the things we could do, and these are the consequences and the impacts, what are your views? Now, what we will do from that point, once we get the community's feedback, is obviously, as part of the final report, is analyse what the community think about those options, what the potential consequences of impact of those options are, and potentially what the cost is, because that will certainly fit into the slot of the viability. And that will lead down to an informed report that will identify measures that are, basically the banding, measures that are feasible, that are supported by the community, that are short, medium and long-term wins. And it may well be that some of them will remain options. But the idea, I suppose, in regards to, say, take Whiteman Road, where we've got, say, 4 options, which is minor interventions, which are still quite significant interventions, one way in one direction, one way in the other direction, or a full modal filter type closure. There will certainly be some of those options that will come out of the process, because where there are a number of residents saying they would like this option, when opened up to the wider community, that there will probably be a very strong feeling that this isn't a viable solution and that the consequences are too much. And so the report will sum that up and then come forward with a recommendation is this is what we recommend you do. And then from that, officers and the Cabinet member will have to decide which of the measures we then take forward. So I mean, I'm hoping the engagement process plus the process we've been to get through where we are will allow us to filter it down into a series of viable proposals, which then, based on the funding, we will have to say, these are ones that we can take forward in the short term, and that will probably still be far more that we can afford, and then that will have to be whittled down in some mechanism with the Cabinet member into what we do stick into year 1, 2 and 3 and what will go into subsequent years. And what may be long-term aspirations. There are many. I mean, again, Emma has gone, but the junction on the retail park is a particular concern. I don't think anyone agrees with that. It's a big impact on traffic in the area. Lots of people have identified it. Now, it's an intention to redevelop, or for potentially a redevelopment of that retail park to go on. As part of that, it could well be £1 million to amend that junction. That would be a requirement through the planning process that they did that. That may be 5 or 10 years down the road, but as a council we wouldn't invest £1 million of our own money when we know potentially we can get a developer to do it as part of that works down the road. And so, that's the sort of process that will be gone through. But you're right. I mean, it's going to be a challenge to decide what those priorities are, and I think and it was a point that was made earlier about, how are we going to end up with a digestible, understandable piece of work with this, with so much data? And we'll yet to see. I mean, I'm hoping that we will come up with a meaningful piece of work, but it may need some further work and discussion by the steering group or with others to actually turn what comes out of the report into what we can say, this is the strategy for Green Lanes, the Green Lanes area and those wards in transport terms over the coming years, and that will sit with planning, with transport planning, and with ourselves for things that we can deliver over time when opportunities become available.
Clive, you had a question.
I just wanted to pass on a suggestion. Stop me if you've heard this one before. It's not my idea, but I did see it some years ago, and I thought it's worth investigating. And that is, it has to do with joined-up thinking, more specifically joining up cycle routes. Finsbury Park, as you probably know, is on a cycle network. The suggestion was that there be made a new entrance on the north-eastern side of Finsbury Park, opposite the Hermitage Road intersection, and that there be a combined pedestrian and cycle crossing there, so that you would be able to have a pretty much continuous cycle route, Hermitage Road, crossing Green Lanes into Finsbury Park and point south. That was the suggestion. It seemed to make sense to me. Just wondered what you thought. Thank you.
trying to picture those in mind. I mean, I think this is potentially tied up with this issue of the quiet route development. But you know, if we've been promoting the route into Finsbury Park down Whiteman Road, then looking at that linkage, and if we do look at that of rediverting that route from down Whiteman Road towards the park, then that may be a viable solution to look at, because the route currently is run taking a different alignment into Finsbury Park. I'm not sure at this stage that it would necessarily be worth investing time at looking at that proposal. I must admit, it's not one I've heard. That doesn't mean that my colleagues in transport planning, who tend to be the main, I don't know if this has come from the HCC, but transport planning, Malcolm Smith, you know, those are the group that have the regular dialogue about developing cycling aspirations and including them within bids. It may be something that they have considered and looked at, and may be something that was being considered as part of the previous aspiration for alignment of the Quiet Way route between. But certainly, I mean, we're happy to raise that and raise Emma's awareness of that issue to see how that may fit into the cycling strategy, and to engage on the HCC with it to see what they consider about it.
Well, I would be happy if that was just minuted, that suggestion. Thank you, Rob. And I think possibly Councillor Blake doesn't want to have minuted the suggestion about building a wall on the boundaries of our borough to keep people out. You say, but yeah, I discussed that with the good councillor there. Thank you.
Any other last question before we... No? Okay, I'll close this. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Peter.